The San Antonio Spurs just made one of the most interesting and controversial first-round picks in the 2026 NBA Draft, Jayden Quaintance. A 6'10" defensive powerhouse, a player with top 10 talent when healthy, a projected anchor next to Victor Wembanyama in what could become one of the most terrifying defensive frontcourts in the NBA. But there's one word that keeps following him everywhere he goes: knee. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. ACL tear, meniscus damage, lingering swelling, another possible procedure, missed seasons, missed development time. And suddenly, the conversation around the Spurs pick shifts from steal of the draft to something much more complicated. How risky is this really? Because in San Antonio, patience is part of the culture, but even the Spurs have to ask the hard question: what happens if the knee never fully stabilizes? What the Spurs actually drafted. Let's start with the upside before we talk about the risk, because Jayden Quaintance didn't fall to 20 because of lack of talent. He fell because teams had to weigh two completely different versions of him. On one hand, you have the freshman version at Arizona State, a disruptive defensive force who averaged nearly 8 rebounds and over 2 blocks per game, setting freshman records in rim protection. A player with elite timing, switchability, and explosive vertical presence around the basket. On the other hand, you have the injury timeline. A torn ACL in February 2025, a meniscus issue layered on top of it, only 4 games played at Kentucky. And then, just as teams were evaluating him pre-draft, reports surfaced that he may still need another knee procedure to clean up lingering issues and could miss the start of the 2026-27 season. That's not minor. That's not fully recovered but being cautious. That's ongoing medical management on draft night. And this is where the Spurs' decision becomes fascinating, because San Antonio didn't draft him expecting immediate production. They drafted him knowing they might not get real on-court minutes for a long time. And that alone tells you how serious the injury concern really is. Why the injury fell into red flag territory. ACL injuries in modern basketball are no longer automatic career killers. We've seen players return to all-star levels. We've seen players regain explosiveness. But what changes everything in Quaintance's case is not just the ACL, it's the combination. ACL plus meniscus plus lingering pain plus repeat procedures. That combination is what shifts perception from standard rehab to complicated recovery. Because ACL rehab is predictable in structure, even if it's long. But when you add meniscus involvement, especially repeated cleanup procedures, you introduce uncertainty around load management, swelling response, long-term knee durability, explosiveness retention, and minute-to-minute stability. And for a player like Quaintance, that matters even more, because his entire identity is built on physical dominance. He's not a finesse big, he's not a spacing-oriented shooter. He's a high-motor, vertical athlete who relies on second jumps, explosive takeoffs, lateral recoveries, rim protection timing. If the knee loses even a fraction of that explosiveness, his defensive ceiling shifts. Not disappears, but shifts. And that's exactly why some teams passed before pick 20, because the range of outcomes is unusually wide. You're not just drafting a player, you're drafting 2 possibilities: a defensive anchor or a physically limited rotation big. The Spurs' internal risk calculation. The Spurs are not an organization that ignores medical flags. If anything, they're the opposite. They've built their identity on long-term development, patient recovery timelines, and maximizing player careers rather than rushing returns. So when they selected Quaintance, it wasn't ignorance of the injury, it was acceptance of it. The front office essentially made a bet: we believe the upside is worth the wait. But that doesn't mean there aren't concerns internally. In fact, there are 3 major ones. 1. Availability timeline uncertainty. Even optimistic projections suggest he could miss Summer League in possibly part of his rookie season. That means delayed NBA pace adjustment, delayed chemistry building, delayed defensive scheme integration. For a Spurs system built on structure, that matters. 2. Re-injury risk window. The most dangerous period for ACL recovery is not surgery, it's the return phase. When players start ramping up, cutting, landing, absorbing contact,
That's when setbacks typically occur. And for a player already requiring additional procedures, the Spurs have to be cautious that the knee doesn't enter a cycle of repeated maintenance. 3. Developmental stagnation. This is the quiet concern no one talks about enough. At 18 to 19 years old, missed time is not neutral, it's lost development. While other rookies are learning rotations, improving skill packages, adjusting to NBA pace, Quaintance may still be in rehab protocols, and that creates a gap that is hard to close later.
The what if he never fully recovers scenario. This is the uncomfortable question Spurs fans don't want to ask, but absolutely should. What does Jayden Quaintance look like if the knee never returns to 100%? Not career-ending, not catastrophic, but compromised. In that scenario, you likely lose some vertical explosion, some lateral recovery speed, some second jump timing. And that changes his archetype entirely. Instead of a potential elite defensive anchor, he becomes more like a positional rebounder, a drop coverage big, a low-usage defensive role player. Still valuable, but not the franchise-shifting presence teams dream about when drafting a player with top 10 upside. And that's where the Spurs roster construction becomes relevant. Because when you already have a generational defensive centerpiece in Victor Wembanyama, you're not just drafting for redundancy, you're drafting for complementary dominance. Quaintance was supposed to be the second wave of rim protection. If his athleticism doesn't fully return, that pairing shifts from terrifying to simply solid. And in the Western Conference, solid doesn't move the needle.
Why the Spurs still took the swing. Despite all the risk, there's a reason San Antonio didn't hesitate at 20. Because upside at that size and defensive profile is extremely rare. Before the injury concerns, Quaintance was widely projected as a lottery pick. Some even had him top 10. And the Spurs are betting on a simple NBA truth. If the medical clears out, they got a steal. They are essentially buying elite defensive instincts, switchable front court versatility, rim protection instincts, and age-based upside at a discount. And they're doing it in an environment where they don't need him immediately. That matters, because rush development is often where injury recoveries get worse. San Antonio can afford patience. They can afford to bring him along slowly. They can afford to let him sit, rehab, and strengthen. And if there's any organization that has historically optimized long-term player health management, it's this one. But again, that's the optimistic case.
Realistically, fans should adjust expectations. This is not a typical rookie situation. There are 3 likely outcomes for year 1. Scenario A, full redshirt year. He spends the season rehabbing, training, and not playing meaningful minutes. Scenario B, late season return. He returns after All-Star break in limited minutes, likely in controlled defensive roles. Scenario C, G League ramp-up. He plays sparingly in NBA games while getting conditioning reps elsewhere. None of these are bad outcomes, but all of them mean one thing: he will not define the Spurs season. And that's important because fans often expect immediate payoff from first-round picks. This situation is different. This is a long-term development investment disguised as a draft pick.
So let's answer the real question. Should Spurs fans be worried about Jayden Quaintance's injury history? The honest answer is yes, but not in a panic sense, more in a patience and variance sense. Because the concern is not that he can't recover, it's that recovery is no longer a straight line. There are checkpoints now, there are procedures now, there's uncertainty now. But the upside still exists in a very real way. If the knee stabilizes, the Spurs may have landed one of the best defensive prospects in the draft at pick 20. If it doesn't, they still likely end up with a rotation-level defensive big who can contribute in specific schemes. The swing is wide, that's the reality, and that's why this pick will be judged not in draft night reactions, but over the next 2 to 4 years of medical reports, rehab updates, and eventual on-court production. Because Jayden Quaintance isn't just a draft pick, he's a long-term medical and developmental project wrapped in elite defensive potential. And for the Spurs, the entire bet comes down to one question: can the body catch up to the talent?
If you enjoyed this breakdown and you're excited about the future of Spurs basketball, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the silver and black. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Spurs!